Nebraska Territory, 1874. It is the third week of October, and the sky over the Republican River Valley has turned the color of old iron. A woman named Clara Dodd is standing in front of 160 acres of flat, open grassland. She is 31 years old. She has 2 children, a boy of 7 and a girl of 4. She has a cast iron pot, a wagon, 2 horses, a sack of seed corn, and a husband named Robert who is already running a fever he will not recover from. She does not know that yet. She will know it by the end of the month. What she has carried with her from her mother's house in Kentucky, through the Cumberland Gap, across the Missouri River, and out onto this vast and indifferent plain is how to survive. Not in the vague, general sense that word gets used today. In the specific, practical, daily sense. By the end of November, Robert Dodd is buried on the eastern edge of the claim. Under a wooden marker, Clara cut herself from a cottonwood branch. By the end of March, both children are alive. The food held, the shelter held, the knowledge held. Clara Dodd lives to 84. When her granddaughter cleans out her house in 1931, she finds a handwritten notebook tucked behind the flour tin. 34 preparations: food, medicine, shelter, water. Every single one costs nothing. There are 25 skills on this list. Number 20 is a water purification method the United States Army adopted for field canteens in World War I. Number 13 is a wound treatment that a 2012 study in the Cochrane database confirmed is as effective as anything used in a modern emergency room. And number 3 is the single skill that every frontier family built their entire survival system around. Almost nobody alive today can still do it from scratch. These skills did not disappear because they stopped working. The modern world did not improve on them. It simply made you forget them. My name is Elias Boone. If this is the kind of knowledge that matters to you, stay with me. Before we get to the list, you need to understand who these people were. In 1862, the Homestead Act opened 270 million acres, 10% of the entire United States landmass, to settlement. Between 1862 and 1900, 1.6 million families filed claims. Average starting capital, less than $200. Average distance to the nearest town, 27 miles of unpaved trail. The first winter mortality rate on the Great Plains was approximately 1 in 8 families losing at least one member. Not from violence, from cold, from illness, from the simple and brutal arithmetic of not knowing enough. The families who survived did not survive by luck, they survived by knowledge. The frontier was not won by the strongest, it was won by the most capable. And capability, in 1874, meant knowing exactly what to do when there was no one to call and nothing to buy. Skill number 25. Building a sod house. Prairie sod, the dense, root-bound top layer of grassland built over 10,000 years, was cut into bricks 12 inches wide, 4 inches thick, and 24 inches long. A family of 4 could build a 16 by 20 foot house in 11 days. Interior temperatures stayed within 15 degrees of 55 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, warmer in winter and cooler in summer than any wood frame house. The United States Department of Agriculture studied sod construction thermal efficiency in 1912 and found it superior to standard wood framing for Great Plains conditions. Modern passive house construction uses the same thermal mass principles at $300 per square foot. Clara built hers for nothing. Skill number 24. Starting fire without matches. The friction match was invented in 1826. Reliable access to matches on the frontier did not come until the 1870s. Until then, and as a backup after, frontier families carried a char cloth tin, cotton fabric carbonized in a sealed tin, capable of catching a spark from flint and steel and holding an ember without flaming. Combined with tinder fungus, Fomes fomentarius, the horsehoof fungus on dead birch, a skilled person had fire in under 90 seconds in any weather. Lewis and Clark's journals, covering 8,000 miles of unmapped territory between 1804 and 1806, document flint and steel as the standard fire-starting method throughout the entire journey. Not because matches did not exist, because this method never failed. Skill number 23, navigating by stars. No compass, no map. Polaris is fixed within 1 degree of true north. Orion's belt rises due east and sets due west regardless of latitude. The angle of the moon's illuminated edge indicates the direction of the sun below the horizon. Frontier scouts navigated by the sky. Lewis and Clark used celestial navigation as their primary method across the entire Western expedition. They recorded star sightings on clear nights to calculate latitude and confirm position on maps they were drawing as they traveled. The knowledge required no instrument, only attention, over time, to the sky above the same piece of ground. Skill number 22. Building a root cellar in 3 days, 8 by 10 feet, 7 feet deep. Stone-lined walls. Timber roof covered with 18 inches of packed earth. 2 people. 3 days. $0. The result maintained temperatures between 32 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit through Great Plains winters that regularly dropped to -30. Vegetables, preserved meats, and dairy kept from October through April. 6 months of food storage without a single watt of electricity. Modern refrigeration in the United States consumes approximately 240 billion kilowatt-hours of electricity per year, 6% of total national consumption, dedicated entirely to keeping food cold. Clara Dodd kept her food cold with a hole in the ground and 18 inches of dirt. Skill number 21. Pemmican. Dried lean meat pounded to powder. Rendered kidney fat melted and mixed at 50% meat to 50% fat by weight. Dried berries added for flavor and vitamins. The result? 3,500 calories per pound. Shelf life without refrigeration of 2 to 5 years. The Hudson's Bay Company ran its entire North American fur trade operation on pemmican from 1779 to 1870. The United States Army studied it for field rations in 1898 during the Spanish-American War. Modern energy bars attempt to replicate this at $4 per 250 calories. Pemmican cost frontier families nothing but time. Skill number 20. Water purification, the silver method. Boiling was standard, but frontier families also used silver. A coin dropped into a water barrel inhibited bacterial growth for days. The oligodynamic effect of silver on bacteria, silver ions disrupting cellular respiration, was formally documented by Swiss botanist Carl Wilhelm von Nageli in 1893. Frontier families had been using it for 40 years before that. The United States Army adopted silver-based water purification for field canteens in World War I. Colloidal silver purification products now sell for $18 to $45 per bottle. The silver coin is still silver. The chemistry has not changed. What changed is whether someone can sell it to you. Skill number 19. Ash lye water for food safety. Wood ash dissolved in water creates a mild alkaline solution, pH between 9 and 11, effective at killing surface bacteria on vegetables, preserved meats, and food preparation surfaces. Frontier families used it to wash work surfaces, treat drinking water when boiling was not possible, and preserve eggs submerged in dilute solution for up to 9 months. The commercial sanitizer industry in the United States generates $2.3 billion in annual sales. Ash lye water cost frontier families nothing. The ash came from the fire they were already burning. Let's stop here for a moment. Clara Dodd arrived on that Nebraska claim with less than $200. By her 3rd winter, she was self-sufficient. Not comfortable. Self-sufficient. There is a difference. The average American household in 2024 carries $104,000 in debt. The average frontier homesteader, by year 5 on a successful claim, carried $0. Not because they earned more, because they knew how to produce what they needed from what the land provided. The consumer credit industry in the United States generates $176 billion in annual revenue. It was built almost entirely on replacing the self-sufficiency that Clara Dodd and families like hers had mastered. They did not lose these skills because they became unnecessary. They lost them because an entire industry needed them to. Some of you watching this grew up in houses where these skills were still alive, where the knowledge was still in the room. That room is getting smaller every year. We are not done, and it gets more specific from here. Skill number 18. Yarrow leaf wound packing. Achillea millefolium, named for Achilles who, legend says, used it to treat his soldiers' wounds at Troy. Frontier families packed deep wounds with fresh or dried yarrow leaf, pressed directly into the wound and held with a strip of cloth. Yarrow contains achillodin, a compound that accelerates blood clotting. A 2013 study in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology confirmed yarrow extract reduces clotting time by 32%. The same compound is now synthesized into hemostatic gauze used by the United States military at $28 per pack. Yarrow grows wild across every state in the continental United States. The plant has not changed. The knowledge of what it contains is almost gone. Skill number 17. Activated charcoal for poisoning. Every frontier family had charcoal, the byproduct of every fire, available in unlimited quantities at zero cost. For suspected food poisoning or accidental ingestion of toxic plants, powdered charcoal mixed in water was drunk immediately. Activated charcoal adsorbs toxins, binds them chemically, and carries them out before absorption into the bloodstream. The New York Academy of Medicine formally recommended it as a poison treatment in 1834. It remains the standard emergency room treatment for certain poisonings today at $50 to $200 per hospital dose. Frontier families made it from their own fire, free, and used it the moment it was needed. Skill number 16. Onion and honey chest. Poultice. Raw onion, sliced thin. Raw honey spread between the layers. Applied to the chest on a cloth, covered with a wool blanket. Left overnight. Used for chest infections and the deep winter coughs that killed children on the frontier. Quercetin in raw onion is a proven anti-inflammatory and antiviral. Raw honey contains hydrogen peroxide and methyl glyoxal, both with documented antimicrobial properties. A 2021 study in BMJ Evidence-Based Medicine found honey more effective than antibiotics for upper respiratory symptoms in otherwise healthy adults. Frontier families knew this in 1875. The science caught up 146 years later. Skill number 15. Echinacea root immune preparation. Plains Indian tribes had used Echinacea purpurea for centuries. Frontier families adopted it, drying the root in fall and boiling it at the first sign of illness. A 2015 meta-analysis in Evidence-Based Complementary and Alternative Medicine examined 24 randomized controlled trials and found that Echinacea reduced the incidence of the common cold by 58% and shortened its duration by 1.4 days. The global Echinacea supplement market is now worth $132 million annually. The plant grows wild across the Great Plains. Frontier families picked it for free. Skill number 14. Smoke drying meat, the jerky method. Lewis and Clark left Fort Mandan in April 1805 carrying 200 pounds of jerked meat, heading into territory where resupply was impossible. Thin sliced lean meat, salted, hung over slow hickory smoke for 8 to 12 hours, moisture reduced below 10%. Shelf life, 6 months in a cool, dry place. The commercial jerky market in the United States is now worth $3.4 billion annually. The process has not changed since 1805. The price has. Skill number 13. Wound irrigation with clean running water. Before antiseptics, before antibiotics, the single most effective wound treatment was the simplest. Clean running water applied in volume immediately after injury. Frontier families who flushed wounds thoroughly with clean water had dramatically lower infection rates than those who packed wounds dry. A 2012 systematic review in the Cochrane database confirmed that tap water irrigation is as effective as sterile saline for wound cleaning in most clinical situations. Frontier families knew this by observation. Medicine confirmed it 140 years later. Skill number 12. Cold smoking for long-term meat. Preservation. Different from hot smoking. Cold smoking maintains temperatures below 90 degrees Fahrenheit. The meat does not cook, but smoke penetrates deeply, depositing phenols and aldehydes that inhibit bacterial growth at the cellular level. A cold smoked ham lasted 12 to 18 months without refrigeration. Every established frontier homestead had a dedicated smokehouse. The knowledge of how to build and operate one correctly, including wood selection, temperature management, and timing, is almost entirely gone from the American population today. Not because the method stopped working, because the refrigerator arrived, and the refrigerator made the smokehouse unnecessary within a single generation. Let's stop here. In 1874, the nearest hospital to most Great Plains homesteads was 100 miles away. No ambulance, no telephone, no one coming. When Clara Dodd's husband died in October 1874, she did not have the option of falling apart. She had 2 children and a Great Plains winter bearing down on her. The knowing was not optional. My great-grandmother came through the Oklahoma land rush of 1889. She was 19 years old. She staked a claim in Logan County with her husband and a wagon that held everything they owned. She told my grandmother, and my grandmother told me, that the first winter she was more afraid of not knowing things than she was of the cold. She said, "The cold you can survive if you know what to do. It is the not knowing that kills you." There is a generation of Americans alive right now whose grandparents lived this. They came through the land rush, the Dust Bowl, the Depression, carrying this knowledge in their hands and their memory. This list is for them, and for the families they built. The next block covers the skills that separated the families who made it from the families who did not. Pay attention. Skill number 11. Rendering tallow for waterproofing and medicine. Beef kidney fat, rendered slowly until clear and liquid, worked into leather and fabric while warm. A waterproofed wool coat in a Great Plains blizzard, wind chills reaching -60, was the difference between hypothermia and survival. The same tallow mixed with beeswax and pine resin made a wound salve that sealed injuries against infection in conditions where keeping a wound clean was nearly impossible. Modern Gore-Tex waterproofing generates $4 billion in annual revenue. Frontier families waterproofed everything they owned with rendered fat from their own animals. Cost, 0. Skill number 10. Reading wind on the Great Plains, a strip of cloth tied to a stick. That was the instrument. The knowledge behind it took years to build. Wind direction on the open prairie predicted weather with 70 to 80% accuracy for the following 12 hours. The Blue Norther, a fast-moving cold front that could drop temperatures 40 degrees in an hour and kill exposed livestock before a farmer could reach them, came from the northwest. Always from the northwest. The families who knew this prepared. The families who did not prepare lost animals, sometimes more than animals. Skill number 9. Controlled burning for land management. Late fall, after the first hard frost, frontier families burned specific sections of their land. Dead grass was cleared. Weed seeds were killed. Ash released potassium and phosphorus directly into the soil. Native grasses returned thicker and earlier the following spring. Adopted directly from Plains Indian land management tradition, a practice that had maintained the productivity of the Great Plains for thousands of years. The United States Forest Service began suppressing controlled burning in the early 20th century. The catastrophic wildfire seasons of the 21st century are, in significant part, the result of a century of accumulated fuel that controlled burning would have cleared. The knowledge was correct. The policy that replaced it was not. Skill number 8. Pine pitch adhesive and sealant. Pine resin collected from bark wounds, heated until liquid, mixed with rendered fat and powdered charcoal. Waterproof, flexible when warm, hard when cold, permanently adhesive to wood, leather, and stone. Frontier families used it to seal wagon wheel hubs, waterproof canoe seams, seal roof joints, and close wounds. The same basic formulation was used by indigenous peoples across North America for thousands of years before European settlement. Modern epoxy adhesives replicate the bonding properties at $12 per tube. The pine trees are still there. The knowledge of what to do with them is almost gone. Skill number 7. Tracking and reading animal sign. Not hunting. Reading. A deer track pressed deep at the toe and shallow at the heel. The animal was running, alarmed. Alarmed deer meant predators or strangers nearby. A track pressed evenly meant the animal was calm. Calm deer meant the area was safe. Beaver activity on a creek meant clean, stable water upstream. Muskrat lodges built unusually high in September meant a hard winter was coming. This knowledge, accumulated over years on one specific piece of ground, was a complete environmental monitoring system. It required no instrument, only attention, time, and the willingness to learn what the land was saying. Skill number 6. Soft soap from prairie wood ash. Prairie wood, such as cottonwood, ash, and elm, produces a weaker lye than white oak. Frontier families compensated by concentrating the lye water through slow evaporation before combining it with rendered fat. The result was soft soap, stored in a crock, scooped out as needed. It cleaned everything. One afternoon of work produced enough for a family of 4 for 6 months. The soap industry in the United States generates approximately $30 billion in annual revenue. Every dollar of it is spent on something Frontier families produced for free. We are down to the last 4 skills on this list. Every skill we have covered, including shelter, fire, navigation, food, water, medicine, and land management, shared one quality. They kept the family alive without asking anyone for anything. That system collapsed in approximately 20 years. Between 1945 and 1965, rural electrification, paved roads, supermarkets, and television reached the last frontier communities. With each connection, one more skill went unpracticed. One more piece of knowledge went untransmitted. The food preservation industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the home products industry, the consumer credit industry. Each one grew by replacing something frontier families had done for free. Their combined annual revenue in the United States today is approximately $2.1 trillion. The last 4 skills anchored the entire system. When they went, everything went with them. Here are the last 4. Skill number 4. The shadow stick, navigation without instruments. A straight stick 3 feet long is driven vertically into flat ground on a clear day. Mark the shadow tip with a stone. Wait 15 minutes. Mark the new shadow tip. The line between the 2 stones runs east to west, precisely. A perpendicular line runs north to south. No compass, no cost. Accurate to within 2 degrees of true north anywhere on Earth. Documented in the United States Army Corps of Topographical Engineers Field Manual in 1838, it was used when compass readings were unreliable due to magnetic anomalies in iron-rich Great Plains soil. The sun still moves the same way. The shadow still falls the same way. Almost no one alive today knows how to use it. Skill number 3. Brain tanning animal hides. Every animal has enough brain matter to tan its own hide. This is not folklore. It is biochemistry. The brain contains lecithin, a phospholipid that, when worked into a wet hide and then smoked, permanently alters the collagen structure. The result is leather, supple, water-resistant, durable, produced from nothing but the animal itself. A brain-tanned deer hide lasted 20 to 30 years of hard daily use. It could be wetted and dried repeatedly without stiffening. The global leather goods market is now worth $414 billion annually. The knowledge of how to produce leather from scratch, from the animal on your own land, is held by fewer than a few thousand people in the United States today. That is not a statistic. That is the end of something. Skill number 2. The Frontier Household Journal. Not a diary, a working document, planting dates and yields for every crop, every year. First and last frost dates recorded annually. Rainfall measured with a tin can and a ruler. Animal breeding records, remedy preparations, and their results. The Halverson family of Dakota Territory kept their household journal from 1882 to 1931. 49 years of continuous observation on one piece of ground. It is held in the collections of the State Historical Society of North Dakota. Climate researchers have used it to reconstruct Great Plains weather patterns for the late 19th century because it is more detailed and more locally specific than any official meteorological record from the same period. One family, one journal, 49 years of paying attention. That is what the knowledge looked like when it was alive. Skill number 1, knowing when to stop and when to move. This is not a technique, it is judgment. And it was the hardest skill on the frontier. The frontier was full of families who stayed too long, who had invested too much in the claim, in the years of work already done, to recognize when the situation had become untenable, when the well was failing, when the soil was exhausted, and when the winters were getting harder. The families who recognized it and moved, whether to better ground, to a different claim, or to a different strategy, often survived. The families who stayed out of stubbornness or pride or the sunk cost of everything they had already built often did not. The frontier did not reward the strongest or the most determined. It rewarded the most clear-eyed. The ones who could look at what was real, not what they hoped was real, and act on it. This is the skill that cannot be taught. It can only be earned through loss, through failure, through the willingness to see things as they are. Without it, the other 24 skills are just a list. With it, they are a life. I spent 3 months on this list. I read the letters of homesteaders held in the collections of the Nebraska State Historical Society, the Kansas Historical Society, and the State Historical Society of North Dakota. I read the diaries of women who built sod houses and buried children and kept going. And I talked to people, men and women in their 70s and 80s whose grandparents had lived this. Almost every one of them said the same thing. Not with anger, with something quieter. They said, "I tried to tell my kids what my grandmother told me. They weren't interested, and now I'm the last one who knows." That is not nostalgia. That is the end of a line of knowledge that ran unbroken from the first wagon that crossed the Cumberland Gap, through Kentucky and Tennessee, across the Missouri River, out onto the open prairie, to a conversation on a porch somewhere in Nebraska or Kansas or Oklahoma, with no one left to receive it. Clara Dodd lived to 84. She outlasted her husband, 2 droughts, the panic of 1893, and the first wave of the 1918 influenza. She did it with the knowledge in her hands and the judgment in her mind. She never once called it survival. She called it knowing what to do. So here is what I want to ask you. In the comments below, tell me one thing, one skill, one memory, one thing your grandmother or grandfather knew that you watched with your own eyes. Write it down. Leave it here. Because that memory is worth more than you know. And I read every single one. These people were not behind. We are.